Carey will host.
Welcome to Nerds and Friends, our podcast, which today I am not hosting. Instead, Carey and Will are hosting because they're interviewing me. Talking
That's
about
correct.
my book, Exile Into Sand, which will probably show up backwards on your screen because of reasons.
Well, don't worry. People love reading things backwards. Yeah, that's right. It is a minion takeover, much like on several channels on Sirius XM when Slipknot gets to take over Octane, I think. So let's get a peek behind the mask real quick. And Josh, go ahead and tell us about Exile Into Sand. Give us the general overview of what it's about.
The elevator pitch here.
Elevator pitch.
With no elevators.
Oh, God. I was about to start doing the little elevator trick. No.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, we're all just
a lot
gonna.
faster.
That's an express elevator. I'm as low as my seat goes, so I'm going to be going up while you guys go down. This is going to be a very, very weird elevator pitch.
It's a pulley system.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I always just prefer cutting the lines in the elevator. You get down much faster.
There is no spoon.
There is no spoon. Well said. Well, Exile Into Sand, to put it in a quick nutshell, is a fantasy novel about a man with a dark past, criminal history, very roguish man who takes on a newfound faith after a near-death experience. And then it goes horribly awry. So he exiles himself into the desert to the strange new lands of Akal to rediscover himself and try to find hope and try to find a way to redeem himself from his past mistakes. That's the elevator pitch right there.
That sounds like a hell of an elevator pitch. So that's also a pretty interesting structure. If we're talking about just your classic story, that sounds a little bit more, instead of your classic 3-act structure, it sounds a little bit more like the Odyssey, where it's a little bit more of an epic. What made you settle on such an extended kind of format?
Not being good at following rules and structures is what led me there. It just kind of, the book is written, it starts out when he's exiled into the desert. And then as he journeys into the desert, there are flashbacks showing what led him up to the exile. So you kind of have two arcs being weaved together that way. And it just seemed like a logical way to tell the story and have you see the man he is and see into his past as you see him changing and becoming something new, which kind of made for a fun, juxtaposition, if you will.
Yeah.
Like that.
And I know the book Exile Into the Sand takes place in your own fantasy world that you've set up. How much of the world do you set up before you actually started writing this book, and how much just came along as part of the process?
With this one, I definitely had all the cities laid out first, and I had them named. During writing is when I kind of started saying, okay, this city is known for this city has this tradition, stuff like that. So I kind of built it out as I went to some degree, but I did have a map going into writing, and kind of a general idea of what things would happen.
You had your sketch map.
I did. And then I had, the outline changed a number of times during the writing process. But it originally settled, because I was nebulous on the ending for a while. I had kind of the flashbacks, I had his persona ready, and then where he goes from there was kind of, I went back and forth on a couple ideas, but I finally settled on the ending that is written in the book.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know that we've talked about collaborative storytelling before on the show, and how much of that has gone into like this specific book, Exile Into the Sand?
Well, I think definitely playing Dungeons and Dragons with you guys and some of our awesome other players. Shout out to you guys who are listening in. That really helped me with just my storytelling in terms of if I had difficult scenes of, okay, if I had this set up in a D&D game, how would I play around it? That helped me get through my writer's block quite a few times. And D&D really is collaborative storytelling. So that was a big facet in it for sure. And then, so that was the main thing. I mean, this was my first book. Well, I got to say my first book is Only the Strong, which I co-wrote with Caleb Whittle back in high school. And we have both grown as writers a lot since then. And so this was my first solo book, but it was, I definitely couldn't have done it without getting feedback from others. That helped me out a lot. You guys especially. So I appreciate that.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the interesting things about that we know about this book, considering that you did bounce some things off of us over the course of it, is that there's a good chunk of this that is not based off of your life, but it draws off of your experiences.
It does.
And I wanted to know much less what is drawn from your experience, but how did writing this help you process your experience?
I think I had the main character Ardesh's storyline and his arc with religion that had been in my head long before I started writing the book. I had the idea for this book, I want to say back in like 2016 or 2017. And I didn't actually start putting pen to paper until March of 2020. Yeah, March of 2020. But it kind of helped me just have a framing on how I went from being raised religious but not super religious, to then becoming super religious. As Carey remembers, when I was in college, I went through a phase where I was super into that stuff. And
I remember that he wore robes. He had that 12-foot tall golden staff made out of a cross. No, wait, that's that cult around Boulder. Never mind. Didn't even look like Josh. It's a weird wire to cross. Real dude, by the way. Anybody who's listening,
association that you have there now.
Oh yeah, I remember walking by the CU Commons and seeing that guy with the 10-foot tall golden cross staff and being like, well,
I don't remember this person.
It happened on occasion. Just a weird preacher. He'd come by, and because the CU Commons is public space, so he got his time in the Agora. So anyway, that guy not being you, how did please go on.
Well, I just I finally had a crisis of faith, and am currently an atheist now, and have been for quite some time. But and my main character goes on a very similar journey, so it helped me cathartically just to put it on paper and show someone else go through it and be like, that character gets me, I get him, So it was fun. It was gratifying.
How much of yourself is in them, the main character in the book?
Initially a lot, and then the more I wrote, the more I pulled from other actors I'd seen in other roles in totally different TV shows that I wanted to emulate. And I ended up making him not at all like me, I don't think. Unfortunately, I'm not a successful criminal in a fantasy world. So the character is also older than me. He's like 36. So Ardesh is a little bit older than me, and he's got a lot more life experience under his belt for sure. So it ended up morphing into something quite different for me. Yeah. Which is fun. I don't when I was younger, I would write characters that were based on me, but the more I've played D&D and the more I've explored my creativity, the less I want to write characters that are like me, and the more I want to write characters that are real different from me. And that's more interesting,
Yeah, is that an intentional choice that you made consciously, or just kind of how your interests have changed over the years?
Now that I'm saying it, I'm like, oh yeah, when I make D&D characters or when I think of characters from my book, I want them to be real different than me. But maybe have something that they're going through that I can understand and empathize with. So I
Mhm.
have some connection to them. But yeah, I guess now that I'm saying it, it's a kind of a conscious choice, but no, it just kind of morphed naturally as I grew older and wiser and more creative.
Mhm.
Well, that's a cool way of expanding your repertoire of being able to empathize with a lot of people and their different backgrounds. With driving that, how do you do character interactions in that respect? Like how like is your book centered like around this one character and he's the most important character and like people kind of like come into and leave his party, or is this kind of a slow getting the team together kind of concept? How's the story, and what drew you to that angle?
That's a really good question. So it is this one. My second book is the opposite, but my first book, Exile Into Sand, is very much centered around the main character, Ardesh, and people join him on his quest and then leave him and then come back. Um, and so there is kind of this theme of loneliness and like kind of bitter autonomy, I'd say,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of goes with the character, and that was fun to explore. And the reason I guess I've felt that way sometimes, especially like when I moved to Los Angeles right out of college, didn't really know anyone here. It was daunting and jarring, and I think that bled into the character a lot. Um, but yeah, my second book is very much a getting the team together, and every chapter is from a different character's point of view, so you get a lot more diverse pacing in the storytelling. And I
Uh-huh.
think I prefer that now that I've grown as a writer. I feel like I can do that and do it justice. But for my first book, I think it was very helpful to have it centered on one character so I could tell things from his tone throughout the book.
There you
Yeah,
go.
a lot less switching gears that way, I'd imagine.
Yes. Now that I'm a little more, I've worked my creative muscles more. I'm like, okay, I can gear shift.
Mm.
It's fun.
Mhm.
Well, here's a question based off of that, or in a way, like, so you feel more comfortable with like bands of people. I know you, and I met you as a complete sci-fi nerd.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
definitely you dig fantasy, but like when I used to think Josh Lindquist, I'd think like sci-fi was your jam. And for these two books, from what I understand, from these two books, I know you are writing in a fantasy universe.
Mhm.
Do you have intentions of writing sci-fi, and if so, what kind of sci-fi would you like to write?
That's a great question. I still love science fiction. I love reading it. I love watching it. But for some reason, all of my writing has been, I feel really good writing in a fantasy world. I don't know
Mhm.
why. I just do. And like with Dungeons and Dragons, even recently, I've tried to play some Star Wars games, and I love Star Wars, but I just am so much more connected to the fantasy D&D games than I am to the Star Wars games. So I've
Mhm.
actually put those on hiatus recently so I can focus on my writing and stuff. But
Mhm.
uh, yeah, I don't know why the fantasy stuff just flows. I think because I'm in total control of the world, it
Mhm.
helps a lot. And so with science fiction, you have more constraints and more you have to play within a tighter suspension of disbelief
Yeah, you
for the
can you
audience.
can make up fantastic technology that does anything, but you also have to do a great deal of legwork to
Mhm.
at least make sure you understand the, at a bare minimum, soft science that goes into it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think subconsciously that daunts me. And so I've
Mhm.
have not done that yet. All of my writing has been, well, we'll set aside screenplays, but all of my fiction writing has been fantasy. So I think that's my home turf. That's my playground right there.
Yeah.
Appreciate
And I
that.
know obviously Dungeons and Dragons is a big influence for you,
Yeah.
but in specifically with Exile of the Sand, in the world of a call, you have a few different races that you came up with of just these fictional races of people that the characters interact with. How did you decide what you wanted in there? Was that just based on the world, or did you have just kind of a cool idea that you just wanted to kind of put in the story because you could?
That's a great question. So yeah, I wanted there to be more species, and I wanted to kind of, because I grew up on, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, love it. But I always thought, okay, there's really just elves, dwarves, humans, and hobbits, and then orcs, and everyone's very regimented. I wanted more diversity and mixture and just fun with that. So I definitely wanted it where, I guess I do have the Akvolni species, which are like vulture people, and those are primarily only in a call. But pretty much everyone else, I wanted there to just be a mixture everywhere and have humans as slightly predominant, but not too much. So I just made up some different species that were just fun to play with, and just I wanted it to be. Initially, I had something like close to 30 species. And I was like, this is too much for me to keep track of, let alone a reader. So I'm gonna dial it back some. And I did dial it back to I think I only kept like, it's under a dozen for sure.
Yeah.
Just to make it more accessible for the reader and for myself. But I have fun creating and this again stems back to Dungeons and Dragons, thinking of, new creature species, new, abilities and strengths, and just, with differing biology, how your life would be differently if you were, a tiger person. It's just fun to imagine, if it was like you're a humanoid tiger, it's like, that's pretty cool, So I just have fun with it.
How deep do you get into making these races? Like, do you, because I can speak from my experience, like when I decided in writing a fantasy book that I wanted to break from the more traditional, what is now kind of traditional, the Tolkienian lineage, like you're talking about. I went back to, as much as I am I'm fascinated by evolution and science and all that. I went back to mythology that I truly love, which is Hellenistic, so Greek and before, and the way that what could be considered divine beings or spirits, or just interacting with personifications of nature, that is what kind of steers version, like kind of a soft evolution in the world I'm coming up with.
That's cool.
So I wanted to know if you have gone back like that, or are you or are you like, this sounds cool, I'm going to make it, and because it's a fantasy universe, let's do the rule of cool here?
Yeah, pretty much rule of cool. But I did look at obviously being a desert land, there was a lot of Middle Eastern aesthetic that I pulled from. I looked at lots of artwork online. I thought about lots of animals that you would see in the desert, and how I could make deities that were inspired by those creatures. So just kind of trying to think outside the box and make it, not like, oh, we're going to Arabia, but fantasy, to make it different, but still have similar aesthetic of, okay, if we had nomads, how would they operate? How would their lifestyle be? And, of course, you got to look at the Bedouins who have been doing this in real life. And it's like, okay, a lot of their circumstances dictate how they live. How would that translate into a fantasy universe? People doing something similar, where are the similarities in? Where can we add in extra things to make it interesting? It's just, and then that's where the rule of cool comes in. You can just run with it,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because as me being an illustrator, like anytime I've made up some weird creatures just for the aesthetic or something, or for a piece of art, or just because I'm bored, and like for me that always just the big thing is trying to make something that looks plausible and interesting. And I know in a fantasy world you get a little more play with that, where like you can kind of, if you need to, you could completely change the laws of physics in your world. So have you done much considering for like how this would actually be possible? Or when you're dealing with like, I believe you call them the ink shell or the insect
Ishigel.
people?
The Ishigel, yes.
Ishigel. I apparently can't read.
But those are the people. Those are the Innsmouth people, right? Those are your fish.
No, they're insectoid people. They're very humanoid cricket-like. Yeah.
Different than the men of Innsmouth. Okay.
Yes.
Very different.
But yeah, do you think like there is that of like how people would live in the desert, but is it like, have you thought about like how an insect survives here versus some like the bird people that you had mentioned earlier, your vulture race?
I mean, I don't get into it too much, but I figured that, you know, having heavy feathers and stuff would be an impediment in the desert. So I have less of like, you know, the Kura people, which are inspired by Kenku from D&D, but they're a little bit different. And then the Akvulni, the vulture people, they just have vulture heads. They don't have feathers on them. So that makes sense. They're predominantly more desert-like, you know, they have beaks and stuff, but yeah, I guess I don't get too much into the science of how it would work, even though I have thought about how magic works in my world, and there is kind of like a soft science fiction version or explanation that I'll reveal in later books, but it doesn't really come about in Exile Into Sand or in the new book I'm writing. But I do have an idea of what.
Cool thing about that. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, no, the cool thing about that is that you can reveal that information. Like it's as long as you basically know your rules or what you want to do with it, revealing that in later books, especially slowly piecing together information, is a great way of revealing something, even as you're just kind of massaging it out. Like you know, I bring up Neil Gaiman all the time, but the progression of what Morpheus can do across the Sandman series is very much like it's hinted in its broadest, most abstract terms in the first book, and then it's only enriched and expanded as the series goes on, because like I just finished reading volume 9 again, and basically he, like Morpheus says himself, the reason that things are the way they are is because he has agreed to follow a particular set of rules. He could apparently do whatever the fuck he wanted, at least that's implied.
Awesome.
But
awesome.
but these are the rules, and that's a real, like, first of all, that's an amazing workaround. Second of all, it's a great way to reveal character, but also like you see why things are the way they are, and I really respect that writing concept there. You don't have to write a textbook first and then say, okay, now that you've done the reading, go have fun. Like, you can just jump right into the fun.
The opposite of Dune. No, I'm just kidding. I had to read the index first and be like, what? You know?
We need you to read this entire glossary.
Mm-hmm.
I did. The first time I tried to read it, I was doing that where I was piecing together, like being like, okay, they mentioned like something with the machines and like AI, and I was like, I need to understand what happened here. And then I realized, if he wanted me to know more about it, he would reveal. Like at first when he was like the spice melange, I was like, well, I need to know more. And then I realized, just go with the story. You'll get more later. So once I kind of surrendered to it. Yeah, when I surrendered to Dune, it became a much easier read. But at first I was very like, no, I don't like this. You know, I had to surrender to it first. And then I
think that.
Yeah. Hopefully my books are not as hopefully they're more accessible is my hope.
Yeah. Well, there's something to be said about going through a book, and if the problem is that you're wanting more of the book, I would say that's generally a win for the author.
True.
Mhm.
True.
When you want more book, I actually have I've taken up the and an editor will probably tell me to fuck off with this. When I do research into weaponry or tactics, or I draw something that I know, unless it is very, very specific or something that doesn't actually exist in this world, I just drop the word, or I give kind of like a small description, but I don't go into what a Volg or a Bardiche is if we're talking about a weapon, because in my head, young Carey would go pick up a dictionary and look up what a Volg or a Bardiche was and say, oh, it's a polearm, or a goat's foot for cocking back a crossbow, which is something that I just wrote a few hours ago because I was looking up, like, all right, mechanical advantage of crossbow stuff. And that's the kind of thing where it's like, that's where I think it'd be interesting for the reader to, like, if you don't know a word, go check it out, but it also doesn't interrupt the flow. With as much as I do like describing things, it doesn't take it away. Be like, a goat's foot is a slightly curved piece of metal with a lever in the middle that's used to brace against the, like, no, I don't need that.
Yeah, because I figure if you write it a certain way where it's like describing it, and then if the person wants more, they can go look it up, but they can also just say, context wise, I get what they're describing. It's something part of the crossbow. Let's move on. You know, you give them that option, which is great. So
yeah,
I think that's really cool.
There's that fine balance, and I think we actually had this conversation, me and Carey, about whether or not to use the term ricasso or to just say the unsharpened part of the sword.
Mm-hmm. And in the end, because I basically made it into a tautology. I think the first time I wrote it, because I said the unsharpened ricasso of the blade, and Will was the one who was like, he's like, hey, it can be the unsharpened part of the blade, or it's the ricasso. And my thing for that was like, if this is the very first time that I'm bringing up the concept of a ricasso, then that use of a tautology, I think, would be justified. Yeah, because somebody would get that. And, you know, like, I'm saving that for maybe, you know, another draft, but that's what I always think is so interesting about writing fantasy or writing sci-fi or writing anything where you get to kind of like make up your own rules to something, is basically is most of the stuff is based in things that are in human experience, until you get into like late Philip K. Dick levels of, like, you know, the insanity. But even then,
the pink ray telling him what to write.
Exactly. The pink ray, the interdimensional stuff. Well, which is also like, it's this very freeing thing that you can do with writing, which is like, I like the idea in my books that I wrote down kind of a rough magical domain idea, just kind of like, it took me like 10 minutes and it just like hit me in the head. But I also like the idea that this is not actually how magic works. This is this is the closest thing that people have come up with to justify how this shit works. So it's like old school alchemy, where it's like, this is as close as we have to the concept of chemistry. And there are some aspects that apply, but it's not like, well, we don't know what the fuck a molecule is yet.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a cool way to approach it. I like that.
I think it's fun. Because you I know you have limited time, Josh. Yes. Is there anything that you wish we had asked you?
No, I think this was really this was a really good interview. I appreciate it, guys.
I do have one question that's been bugging me this entire time. If the main character of your book was playing poker with the main character of the last show you watched,
Oh God, what was the last show I watched? I've been writing so much lately.
What's the
Actually, it would be
over-under?
The Expanse. Is the last show I watched is The Expanse.
Okay, so Tom Jane versus.
Actually, the Stephen Strait's character James Holden is considered the protagonist of The Expanse. Yes, Thomas Jane is like the protagonist in the first couple seasons, and then it shifts focus. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler.
Spoiler. But yeah, it would be James Holden versus Ardesh, and Ardesh would win easily. He's got a criminal background. He's comfortable lying. James Holden can't bluff for shit. He's way too honest. Yes, that's how that would play out. And Will, I love that you asked me that question. Thank you.
Amazing.
Well, thank you guys. This has been a great podcast. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks for interviewing me about my book. I'm very proud of it.
And where can we find your book?
It is on Amazon, on Kindle and paperback.
Links
Very
in the
nice.
description.
Yes, it will be.
Please go buy it, you fuckers.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, Josh.